Did you know there's a new provider network in town? It's called Hopscotch, and it's specifically for child and teen mental health providers. And it's free to join. Hopscotch is onboarding new clinicians now. So stay tuned to this episode to learn more about Hopscotch and see if it's a good fit for you and your practice. Welcome to the Therapy Show podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard. In each episode, I interview a seasoned and knowledgeable talk therapist from the counseling world to glean valuable insights, techniques, and tools that you can apply to your practice and your life. And if you're considering a career in the counseling field or just want to hear about what it's like to be a talk therapist, then this is the podcast for you. Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm excited to release this episode and hope you find it helpful. In this Podcourse, Dr. April Duncan shares Black Kids Matter, play-based strategies to support Black youth experiencing racial trauma. And this episode qualifies for one continuing education contact hour. So to learn about how to purchase that continuing education contact hour, head to the link in the show notes. Dr. April Duncan obtained her Bachelor's of Art and Science from the University of Missouri-Columbia, her Master's of Social Work from St. Louis University, and her Doctorate of Social Work from the University of Southern California. She has over 10 years of clinical experience in supporting children in schools, the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, and nonprofit settings. And as a racial trauma expert, she champions the rights of Black children to reclaim their childhood by using play therapy to help them learn healthy coping skills to manage race-based stress. Dr. April also works closely with community members, educators, parents, and professionals to learn better ways to connect with Black children and provide a safe space to process negative race-based experiences. She's the founder and CEO of BMH Connect. She's the co-owner and founder of St. Louis Play Therapy Institute. She's the owner of All About Play. She's also an adjunct faculty instructor at Tulane University in their MSW program. She's a licensed clinical social worker, registered play therapist, and a registered play therapist supervisor. Once again, you guys, this episode qualifies for one continuing education contact hour. Mustard Consulting is approved by NBCC to provide self-study courses. You can learn all about the objectives, how to purchase the Podcourse. The information to register is in the show notes. You guys, we hope you enjoy this episode and find it helpful and valuable. Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited to have Dr. April Duncan on the show this week. This is actually a Podcourse and will qualify for one NBCC continuing education contact hour. So don't forget, you can always listen to the content for free, as this episode will be a podcast episode in my lineup of episodes. So you can always listen for free. But if you decide that you like the content and you want to purchase the credit hour, you'll just head over to my learning management platform, and that link will be in the show notes. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, welcome, Dr. April. It is great to have you on the show.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. So we today are going to talk about the title of your Podcourse is Black Kids Matter, play-based strategies to support Black youth experiencing racial trauma. And so before we dive into the objectives for this course, can you share a little bit about who you are, your training, maybe how you got to be a therapist? Most people would love to know a little bit about our presenters.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I actually had a little bit more unorthodox path. I was a fashion merchandising major in undergrad and switched over to social work. Around 2014, I went to go get my master's in social work from St. Louis University. And it really was, I have a passion for kids and helping kids. I believe that there's no such thing as a bad kid. Kids are just products of their environment or products of, the parenting skills that people just have that they haven't been given. And so through my education and doing a practicum, I started out in a therapeutic preschool. And I also did a practicum on a suicide intervention hotline. And in that therapeutic preschool, really seeing the high number of Black children that were in our setting because they had already been suspended or expelled from other daycares that they literally had no other place to go. So through my work there, seeing it for myself and then discovering this term, the school to prison pipeline, and the racial disparities that exist in school discipline, that really started me on this path of becoming, I guess, what's called a racial trauma expert. Became a registered play therapist along that path as well too. And so when I decided to pursue my doctorate, it just made sense when I thought about the main issue of race-based stress and trauma that Black children experience, using play therapy as a way to help them learn healthy coping skills and to help their parents connect with them and provide a safe place for them to be able to really process what they've been going through. So I've been a registered play therapist for over 7 years. I've been in private practice, helping kids across all backgrounds and people across the lifespan. I do play therapy with adults as well. But my passion really is in what we can do to be able to really support Black youth because of that extra layer of racial trauma. So that's how I've gotten here.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. You're doing such incredible work. I'm really curious about therapeutic daycare. What were the ages that were in the program?
Yeah, our kids were 3 to 5 years old, and we eventually moved towards being more trauma based. So
Mhm.
kids did have to screen for trauma, but it also depended on where they lived because St. Louis, in the way that it's set up, is city and county funding. So some of our kids had to have some type of child welfare involvement depending on where they lived, and then other kiddos they just had to. It depended where they lived, but ultimately I mean, we kept a small ratio. There was like 2 classrooms. We didn't have more than 12 kids at a time.
Mhm.
It was like a 1 to 3 ratio. And even then, it still wasn't enough hands because, kids that go through a bunch of trauma, it comes out in their behavior.
Right.
And so a lot of our kids were really aggressive, and that's why they couldn't be in other settings. And we gave them, they got individual therapy, group therapy, family therapy. And we had a relationship with an agency that would come in and give occupational therapy and speech as well too. So it gave that all around to be able to help them. Then when they transition to kindergarten, we could advocate like this kid does better in smaller settings, or this kid, because of their trauma, this is the best way to approach them. So it also helped us with supporting them as they went into the school system as well.
Wow, what an incredible program. Really. I mean, I haven't heard of that before, so that's really, really wonderful. So, can you tell us a little bit about the practice that you have now?
Yeah, so BMH Connect, BMH stands for Black Mental Health because there is still a stigma of mental health in the Black community. I didn't want to create an organization that was just like screamed the word Black and mental health. So BMH Connect, we specialize in addressing race-based stress and trauma from a clinical standpoint using play therapy. So we do professional development with schools, government agencies, we also work with nonprofits, private practices, pretty much anyone that's working with Black youth. Our goal is to be able to give them this knowledge of what is racial trauma and how does this present in Black children and how could that be affecting the ways that they're showing up in your environment so we can look at their behavior from a different perspective. In the mental health field, understand that trauma presents as ADHD and depression and things like that, but there is no DSM-5 diagnosis for racial trauma. So a lot of people are missing the fact that not only do we just have kids that are super traumatized in this day and age, regardless of their race, I mean, school shootings and climate change and the political climate, COVID, kids already are dealing with a lot of what we call adverse childhood experiences. But we're not also thinking about how race plays into that as well, too. So we take that different perspective. We also have created a group play therapy program called the Heritage Youth Connection Program, where we actually train any adult. At first, we were focusing on mental health professionals, but when we think about the accessibility issues that Black children and families deal with in trying to get mental health services, understanding the cultural component of spirituality that a lot of times maybe Black children and families are getting support from their church and their church leaders. We wanted anyone to be able to be trained as an ambassador to implement this program. So it's a 8-week play-based program for kids 12 to 17 to learn healthy coping skills and to empower them to be able to I can't control maybe the things that happen in my life, but I can learn healthy skills to manage that so it doesn't affect my mental and ultimately my physical health. And then because we're a play therapy APT approved provider, we provide play therapy trainings as well that are specific of topics that are affecting Black youth.
Gotcha. Okay. So do you also provide private practice services? Like, do you work with children one-on-one and their families as well?
Yeah, great question, Lisa. I actually am waiting for my clinician that I've hired to be licensed. She's waiting on receiving her license and she'll be coming down to Charlotte, and we are going to start providing clinical services. Thank you for asking that because we do too much that I forget.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because as we were kind of getting this ready, I assumed that you were in private practice. I didn't realize that you do more of the training and the consultation and the, more of a, I guess, macro level kind of social work. I didn't realize that. So that's really neat. Really neat.
Yeah, well, I had a private practice for 6 years. I just closed it in May, and it was a different, completely different business. I'm trying to streamline. Like earlier this year, if we would have done this, it would have taken me 20 minutes to explain what I do because I was doing too many things. So now we're just, you know, narrowing it down. So I am in a place in my career where I'm teaching people how to fish. I am doing the more macro level, but the micro is still needed. So that's why I'm excited for the therapists that we're bringing down to start providing those clinical services. And our goal is to obviously expand that. And we're still going to, within our clinical services, we'll still serve all kids. You know, we're not going to turn away a kid that needs help. But what makes us unique is if we do have a child of color, we're going to use race-based assessments that will help us look at their behavior differently than what we would maybe a child that's white because they aren't dealing with those different levels of discrimination and prejudice that children of color might. So it allows for us just to be mindful when we're diagnosing, when we're assessing behavior, and when we're creating treatment plans as well too, because things like recommending that a Black parent call the police on their child if they're having a crisis could really come off as tone deaf if you're not really attuned to how that could feel as a Black parent, knowing the anxiety that we already have typically in our community, and calling law enforcement. And so that's why I love what I do, because I believe that it's helpful for people in our field and anyone, again, that's interacting, teachers, child welfare,
Mhm.
people, juvenile justice individuals, residential placements. It allows for us to look at those things differently so we can understand and connect with our kids and our families better.
Mhm.
Because when I do this training, I could spend 2 hours, 3 hours just talking about the racial disparities in child welfare and the issues with this. And the reason why that's so important to me is all of the interventions and the fun stuff that we can do won't matter if you're not aware of these things that our families are dealing with, because then it's not going to allow for you to build the rapport that you need to then work with them. I get sometimes white clinicians that are like, how do I approach this topic, or how do I work with Black families if I'm not a person of color? And I always say my kids, I call my clients my kids, so I don't have kids, so I just
I got
scoop them up wherever I can, Lisa.
you.
But ultimately, I say if kids or parents are saying they don't connect or don't like someone, it's usually because they're fake or they do too much. So
Mhm.
being authentic and just saying, hey, I know that I'm not a person of color. I know I'm not Black. Is there any concerns that you may have in me working with you that you think might prohibit me being able to help you? That goes a long way. Sometimes just addressing the elephant in the room is really valuable in our relationships with Black children and families. Oh,
Okay.
sorry,
Okay.
talking to.
No, I love it. I mean, this is everything you've said so far is, I mean, I'm really excited to really dive into these objectives and learn more from you. So, speaking of objectives, why don't we go over the objectives and then we'll kind of decide where you would like to go first. So,
Awesome.
okay, so let's just remind everybody the topic is Black Kids Matter play based strategies to support Black youth experiencing racial trauma. So the three objectives are identify 6 signs of racial trauma in Black youth. That's number one. Number two, Discuss 6 play therapy interventions to use in teleplay sessions with Black youth experiencing racial trauma. And number 3, explore 7 ways to support Black caregivers. Okay, so maybe we should just talk about first about number 1, identify 6 signs of racial trauma in Black youth. So, where would you like to start with that?
Yeah, first I'd like to start with just defining it. What is racial trauma? And I like to start with this story because I think it's a really good way to paint a picture of what this looks like in real life. So Darnella Frazier, some of you may know that name, some of you may not. She actually was a teenager at the time. She was the teen that recorded the murder of George Floyd. And teenagers, they put things out on social media. So she wrote kind of like this open letter that she pinned and put on social media. And in there, she talked about a lot of things of the anxiety that she's had since her name has been put out there. Because remember, this is a teenager, and really her name shouldn't have been put out there. But that's a whole nother thing about the adultification of Black children. She talks about the nervousness that she and her cousin have in just walking by that store where the incident happened, or whenever they see a police officer, that they've had to move multiple times because they've received death threats. And even in the trial for Derek Chauvin, she was on she testified, and she talked about the guilt that she had and how she stayed up late at night apologizing to Mr. Floyd that she didn't do more to protect his life. Now think about this. This is a 17-year-old girl that felt guilt that she didn't do more to save the life of a grown man that was interacting with a police officer. That is racial trauma. When she talks about the anxiety, when she talks about the hypervigilance, when she talks about the guilt, the loss of sleep, racial trauma is essentially PTSD that occurs after a negative race-based experience. And research has shown that Black children have an average of 5 acts of racist acts that they deal with every day. So think about if I work in schools and I see that child around noon, they've probably already experienced 3 to 4 already. So how does that affect maybe their attitude or the energy level that they have? Black children, in my research, oftentimes are truant from schools because they don't feel safe walking to school. So then already they're on their way to their walk, they're already experiencing these high levels of stressors that don't occur in other neighborhoods or other communities. So that's what we talk about when we think about racial trauma. It can be physical, emotional, and psychological harm that occurs after dealing with the negative race-based experience. So there's different types of stressors. There's direct traumatic stressors. So that's what Darnella experienced. She directly was involved in that incident, was there in proximity and essentially wrapped up in it, being a bystander and someone that recorded it. So that's someone that directly experiences an act of race-based stress. It becomes racial trauma when it's left untreated. Transmitted is more of like, you may also hear it as generational trauma or intergenerational trauma. So transmitted can look like maybe the ways that Black parents parent because of stressors, or it could be because of the hypervigilance or the anxiety that Black parents have around law enforcement or when they're around law enforcement. It could be the child then responding in that same way because they're picking up on the anxiety or the tension that they see their parents have. Or even something like, we call it the talk in the Black community. The talk is something that Black caregivers have with their children of how they're supposed to act around police officers. You don't talk back, you move slowly, you follow their directions. Because we've seen people like Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice and Mike Brown Jr. I think about my 10-year-old nephew that still can't play with Nerf guns because of Tamir Rice. And so that's an example of transmitted stressors. And then vicarious stressors, these are things that can happen indirectly. Me being a Black woman and seeing someone like Sandra Bland and knowing that, I can get a little spicy sometimes too. That's an example of then when I am pulled over by a police officer, the stressors that I may have, because it may not have happened to me directly, but I've seen what can happen with individuals that look like me. So those are kind of the different ways of stressors that occur with Black children or just within racial trauma. So then you may think about, so how do I know that a kiddo may be struggling or has experienced racial trauma? So I think it's first to kind of just, my recommendation is if you're dealing with a child of color, it's to always kind of start with a racial trauma lens. Just like I feel like with most clients, I usually start with a trauma lens. People typically are in our space because an event that happened that has led to issues that are affecting their functioning on a daily basis. So you may see a kid that has an increase of vigilance or suspicion. So they may be super suspicious of school teachers. They may be coming to your session and saying, oh, that teacher just doesn't like me, or that teacher is out to get me, or I know that they're just only paying attention to me. That may come off as paranoid, which can lead to misdiagnosis, but there may be some truth in that. Believe Black children when they're telling you things. That's important to know. They may also avoid eye contact in your sessions, and they may also communicate a level of mistrust. They may say that they only trust their family and their close friends. So if they really struggle with identifying people outside of that circle for trust, that could be a sign. You might then also see an increased sensitivity to threats. So they may avoid new situations or avoid certain areas, certain teachers, certain parts of their neighborhood. They may also have a heightened sensitivity to being disrespected and shamed as well too. So there's something called adverse police contact. And this is essentially, there was video a while ago of a Black teen girl at a swim party that was being thrown on the ground and arrested by a police officer. And that's an example of adverse police contact. It's embarrassing, it's shameful. Think about it in schools. If I'm constantly being picked on as being the troublemaker, then I'm going to have a heightened level of feeling like I'm being disrespectful, or if people are shaming me. So that could be another example. And then if they also avoid taking risks as well too, if they're not open to new experiences, that can be a sign. Some other signs include increased psychological and physiological symptoms. So if you see that they're getting sick a lot, and that's something that's not normal for them. If you're seeing an increase in depression and anxiety. So the reason why this is so important and why I'm so passionate is the little bit of research that is out there has shown that if this continues to go untreated, it's directly correlated to increased levels of depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, but also suicide. Like Black children literally are killing themselves because they don't have the coping skills to deal with the onslaught of race-based stress that they're dealing with on a daily basis. But just like any other ACEs, we may also see their child development disrupted. You might see regressive behaviors. You may see issues with their social interactions and issues with their cognitive development and their gross motor skills. So that's why it's still a correlation. It needs to be viewed as an adverse childhood event because those connections are similar. And then you also may see an increase in alcohol and drug usage. There's something called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that they put out, and it's a survey that they do across the nation with high school students. And I like to dig really deep in the report and look at, race and ethnicity, and also looking at gender. And Black teenagers are more likely to use marijuana, but they also are the highest demographic in using heroin and also using inhalants, which that was surprising to me as well. So maybe sniffing glue or like spray paint or things like that. Mm-hmm. And when we think about the use of substances, that oftentimes is a coping skill, an avoidant thing, a suppression when we're dealing with trauma that's left untreated. So again, that makes sense that we would see an increase or a use of alcohol and drugs. And that's in an effort to maybe manage pain or to deal with whatever perceived or real danger that they believe is there because of unresolved trauma. Two other signs, you may also see an increase in aggression. So there's a TED Talk video that I always think about, and it kind of shows this kid that was constantly being put out of school, and how it along their life trajectory affected their self-esteem, and they start to detach from school. People think I'm bad. People think I'm no good. So what's the point of even showing up? And then nobody wants to hang out with the bad kid. So it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is why I don't let kids call themselves bad, especially Black children, because of that stereotype of how especially Black males are viewed. But they may then start to feed into that behavior because people already think this way, or I'm so angry at the way that I'm being treated and I don't know how to deal with this anger, so I hit things. So it's not necessarily that Black children are more aggressive, but that again becomes some types of defense mechanism as a way to cope with what they're dealing with. And then finally, narrowing sense of time. So when people, especially kids, are living in a chronic state of danger, they don't develop a sense of future. Dr. Joy DeGruy wrote this book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And if this topic is something as you're listening, you're like, whoa, I want to learn more about this, I really recommend this book because it was really helpful for me, even as a Black person, making a connection as to why we do what we do. And she talks about this term fatalistic behaviors. And they did a study in DC, and they found that Black children had seen so much death around them that they started planning their funerals because they didn't see themselves living beyond the age of 16, 17 years old. And kids as young as like 12 years old were planning the type of music that they want people to play at their funeral and the type of what colors and what they want done at their funeral. Yeah, and it's heartbreaking. So if you are working with a kid and they're unable to identify long-term goals, if they're unable to talk about what they see for themselves in the future, that also could be a sign that they're experiencing some type of race-based stress or trauma.
Okay. I'm just, whew,
You want me to
I'm
keep
learning.
going?
Yeah, I'm just learning so much. I'm like, keep going. What else you got?
Okay. Yeah. So, and I want to talk about, and we're going to talk about what this can look like in play specifically as well too. But I do want to talk about really quickly, like the effects of the psychological effects of racial trauma. You know, we talked about the mental health effects, but this also kind of goes along with the signs of how can I know that a kid might be experiencing this? So one of the effects of racial trauma is alienation. You may see a kid that is adopting the cultural and racial identity for our culture with the United States would be whiteness. So it may be a child that, you know, I think about just me personally, I used to wear a lot of extensions in my hair, which isn't, you know, a bad thing. But I realized that like I didn't feel beautiful unless I had like long weave in my hair that was straight, and my hair is naturally curly, right? And it could look like those type of things, right? Like maybe a child change in the way that their hair looks. It could be something more drastic, like maybe bleaching their skin. I was working with a teen where she was a mixed child, Black and white. She presented as a Black woman, but she was a teenager. That's why I guess I'm calling her one, preteen, young adult. But she saw herself as white, and which was perfectly fine. That's not my place to tell her how she should view herself. But I did have to have the conversation with her of, although you identify as white, you present as Black. So let's talk about how that could be a disconnection with the way that you're treated and the way that you view yourself, or maybe the way that they talk. So that's an example of alienation, some brief examples. Another was internalized racism. So when we think about stereotypes, and you see, I always try to stop myself, you know, when we think about, it just really grinds my gears, Lisa, when I read about things and they say, you know, it's a Black child and they say the 17-year-old man or the 15-year-old man. When you think about it, if you were to look at news articles and you look at things about Black children, they're often, again, like Darnella, her name should have never been shared. They're oftentimes adultified. So when we think about stereotypes and how that plays, Black girls are seen as aggressive and having attitudes and being really fast, and that whole Jezebel situation, loud, mammies, those type of things. Black boys are thugs. They're gonna, we think about going all the way back to Birth of a Nation and this whole idea that Black men are gonna rape and pillage your white women. Those things trickle down to where we are now, but also the way that Black children are viewed. And internalized racism, in that preschool, I had Black boys calling themselves bad, like as a badge of honor, right? That's internalized racism. Worked with a kid where she would say things like, "Oh, Miss April, you know how those light skins are." That's internalized racism. When you think about going back to slavery and the fact that we were separated by color, the lighter people were in the house, but those also were the results of masters, raping Black women, enslaved women. And so all of that trickles down. So, those internalized racism things that maybe they're things that they're saying in the session also can kind of let you know that there may be some racial things, undertones that are happening in that client's life. Race related fatigue. This is just from being tired. I'll share my story. I grew up in white spaces. I was a military child. I was an Air Force brat. And in high school, I was pretty much the only Black cheerleader. And still to this day, some people still refer to me as the Black cheerleader from O'Fallon, like I don't have a name. And so I actually was a collegiate cheerleader. I cheered for Mizzou, but I did not try out my first 2 years because I was tired of being the only Black one. I was tired of being the one that then had to answer just outright racist questions that are like underneath this guise of, oh, I'm just trying to learn. Like, I remember someone asking me if I had purple blood. Like, those, it's tiring. No, I don't have purple blood. Do you have clear blood? Like, you cut a chicken and it bleeds red. Why wouldn't it?
Right.
Like, so you may have kids that are not trying out for certain sports or not doing certain organizations and things they really want to do because of those things. And so that can be another sign when you're working with kids. And then finally, racial mistrust. I tell people all the time, you could be the wokest clinician ever. You can go to protests, you can do the trainings, you can do all those things. But sometimes our clients have had such high levels of trauma in dealing with people that look like you that they may not be able to connect with you. And there's a level of humility we have to be able to say, you know what? Maybe this isn't the best fit for you. That doesn't mean that you're not a great clinician. That doesn't mean that they're a horrible client. But just like any other fit, sometimes it just isn't a good fit. I work with schools, and a school that I worked with in St. Louis years ago, they recognized that this Black child did better with Black teachers. And when I did the consultation, I talked with the parents and heard their kind of own beliefs, their own school histories, their own thoughts about the school for their child. I returned back 2 months later to check in, and they're like, we're still having issues. And I said, why don't you just put them with the Black teacher? Why are we making it so hard? I know we shouldn't have to, but if we see that something is working, why are we still trying to like force this square into like this round hole? We shouldn't have to, but we have to acknowledge that sometimes our kids have had just such high levels of racial trauma that mistrust is there, and no matter what you do, the rapport is not going to be able to be made. So when we look on a more like, how do we look at this from a clinical standpoint before we move over to play, there's also clinical assessments that are out there as well too. Clinical assessments are subjective, but I like it because it's another piece of the puzzle that we can use to be able to figure out what's the best way to treat this kid. So there's something called the race related event scale. That's something that just answers yes or no. So it kind of even gives you a preliminary reading of, are they even dealing with any type of racist experience before I even try to put this lens on. If you do say that that child is experiencing that, there is something also called the race-based traumatic symptom scale that you can use. It's like a pre, mid, and post test to be able to see how's this child's racial trauma presenting. They have like a scale of negative thoughts, they have a scale for aggression, scale for anxiety. So it allows for you to get a better idea of what that specific presentation is for that kid as well. And then finally, there's something called the Philadelphia Expanded ACEs. I don't know if you've heard of this, Lisa. It takes the traditional ACEs and then it also looks at racism as an adverse childhood event. So this is something that you could put into your intake packet, especially if you are working with higher levels of kids of color, that just lets you know from the very beginning, do I need to use this race-related event scale to see what type of events that this child might be experiencing?
Okay, great. This is really helpful. Do you know, are these scales or assessments, are they available? Do you have to be a certain, what am I trying to say, a certain license to access these, or are they open for
So for the ACEs, you have to request it and then they send it to you, but I do have a copy. I don't mind sharing that with everyone. And then the race-related events and the race-based symptom, we actually use it in our practice. I found the article with the questions and then just created the actual document for it and gave the proper citation. So I can also share that with you if you have listeners that want access to that as well.
Okay. Well, just out of curiosity, is it in the reference list? Did you put it in the reference?
I believe it is if I
Okay.
did what I was supposed to do. But it
Okay.
may not just because it wasn't an exact reference.
Okay. We
We'll
will
get it.
yeah, we'll get it to folks if it's something that they want. But I was just curious, like if you because I know there's some assessments like you have to email like I had to email for
Mhm.
like the PTSD, caps. I had to email and ask for that. So I didn't know if that was something. Okay, gotcha. Hopscotch takes the hassle out of your child and adolescent private practice so that you can spend your time and energy on the things that you love. They take care of all the billing and admin work, manage insurance credentialing, deliver competitive session rates and guaranteed payment, plus provide a comprehensive software platform. You get to focus on your clients and let Hopscotch take care of the rest. They provide a listing on their provider directory, enhanced session rates, a dedicated billing and admin support team, plus a HIPAA compliant telehealth. And when you join Hopscotch's free provider network, you'll receive competitive reimbursement rates. You'll also have access to their interactive clinician developed digital content specifically created for kids and teens, along with exercises for at-home parent-child engagement. Other network perks include free continuing education, peer consultation groups, virtual community meetups, and play-based intervention video demos. Are you curious to learn more about this exciting opportunity for child and adolescent providers? If so, head on over to joinhopscotch.com and click on the For Providers section at the top of the page. Once you submit the form at joinhopscotch.com/for-providers, their team will connect with you for a short call to answer any of your questions and talk about next steps. In less than 45 days, you could be ready to begin seeing clients. So if you're ready to get going, that's joinhopscotch.com. Once again, joinhopscotch.com. So are we ready to move on to objective number 2? I think so.
Yeah, because we can
Okay.
start talk about play and then what that can look like within our sessions.
Okay, great.
So as then our second learning objective. So how do we use play? So first, let's talk about why even use play. So I got really excited because I'm a dork and I love research and I like making these connections. I got really excited because one day I had an aha moment. Like when I think about racial trauma, this isn't new to Black children. From the moment that we were brought here against our will, Black children have been subjected to unfair treatment. I've seen pictures of little Black children being used as footstools. I have a picture of a kiddo, little baby. The cotton stalk is bigger than him picking cotton. So I went to, I researched and I was able to find play has been used just like any other population. Play has been used as kind of a coping skill or a way to process what Black children have gone through. So there's different things like I found in the research that Black children would do role plays. And they would do role plays of things like churches, things that were in their lives, the Civil War, but even role play slave auctions. I think that's a powerful way when you think about play and why we use play to help children. Play is a way that kids communicate what they're going through. And so that doesn't change regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of race. And it's been used since, you know, enslaved times in order for help kids to process these things. It also was a unifying thing. I was able to find some archives of Frederick Douglass, and he talked about when it was time to pick teams when they were playing, kids were picked based off of their skill level rather than what their race was. You know, you want to win. So it also was a way that in these contentious times that Black and white children oftentimes would come together. So it was a unifying thing. But then also there's these things called griots in the African our culture. And so at nighttime within the slave quarters, you would have older members that would come tell griots, which is like storytelling and the ways that we learn our cultural traditions that were passed down. So also was a way to create community. So when I thought about how do we think about an innovative solution in dealing with this big problem, play was just like, duh. We use this just like we would anytime. So when we think about play then within working with Black children, I want to highlight a few things. I say, regardless of who you're working with, you want to create a space that's inclusive. So the moment that someone steps into your office from your waiting room, the magazines that you have in your waiting room, the posters that you have, there needs to be diversity. But also if you're doing in person and you're in a playroom, look at your art materials. You should have multicultural construction paper because we come in all beautiful shades, all of us. The multicultural paint. There is Crayola. They have colors of the world. They have crayons, markers, and colored pencils. And I used to only be able to find it on certain sites. They even have it in Target now. So go find those, go holla at those. Your puppets, your dolls, there needs to be multiculturalism. That's how you create, without even words, a space where Black children or children of color can feel comfortable. You don't have to always say, hey, I'm a safe person. What you have in your space communicates that, even down to your website. What type of images and pictures do you have on your website to be able to communicate that you are a clinician that has that cultural humility? That's cultural humility in practice. So within our playroom, making sure that we have those toys and activities there are going to be really important. But then we also want to pay attention to what's called play themes. So play themes are things that developed or ways that we can kind of figure out what's going on with kids in the type of toys and type of activities that they play with. So before we get into the specific interventions, if you don't mind, Lisa, I want to spend just a little bit of time on play themes because you may be doing something that's called more child-centered play therapy, more non-directive. And that can be very beneficial. Any kid that has had trauma, a child-centered approach is going to be really helpful for them because it allows for them to have control. I may not be able to have control anywhere else, but in this room, I can play with whatever I want to play with, however I want to play with. It also can be really powerful, especially with Black boys. A lot of times Black boys are discouraged from playing with certain toys because of toxic masculinity in our community. They're discouraged from playing with dolls. They're discouraged from playing in a toy kitchen because in our community, there's this anxiety of, it's a whole long story. You can do a whole nother podcast on that, Lisa, of if he plays with dolls, he's going to be gay, which we know there is no direct correlation. So how beautiful is it that this child can now come into your space and play with dolls and nobody's going to stop them? And so child-centered is a really powerful way. So you don't always have to come in with more directive activities with kids. Giving them a space where they can pick what they want to play and lead their play is going to be therapeutic all in itself. So if you're doing more child-centered, you do want to pay attention to these play themes. So an example of a play theme would be chaos. This is a kid that comes in and toys are all over the place. They may take the whole bucket of cars and dump it on the floor. I always say with me, sometimes I know if a kid is showing that chaos theme because I become dysregulated myself because they're kind of all over the place. But it also could look like a kid that has difficulty playing with an activity for a sustained period of time, depending on their developmental level. So like a 4-year-old should be able to play Candyland from start to finish without going to another activity, or a 10-year-old should be able to play Connect 4 without being distracted and moving on. Now, it's important to know that especially your first 2 sessions, most kids are going to be chaotic because you're this cool person that has these toys and I don't know what's all in here and I don't know how long I'm going to be in here and I want to get it all in. But if you're about session 4 or 5 and we've settled in a little bit and we're still seeing that chaos, then we definitely could name that more as a theme. That oftentimes is connected with anxiety. So remember, we talked about anxiety kind of being a sign or a kind of a after effect of untreated racial trauma. Independent play as well too. Again, as we kind of talked about Black children being adultified or dealing with high levels of trauma and mistrust, they may learn that I have to take care of myself. And so that can show up in independent play. So independent play could be a kid that is playing. And I've had sessions where kids have played on their own and have not said a single word to me. That's very powerful. And we want that to happen. Sometimes as clinicians, we want to jump in and ask questions, sit with that silence. Everything a kid is doing is communicating what's going on with them. And with these playthings, it allows for us to get a true reading of what's happening with that child, because what they're communicating in their play is going to tell us a lot more than the parents' maybe subjective report of the kid's behavior or the teacher's report of the child's behavior in these clinical assessments. I've had kids that independent play also could be they're cooking in the toy kitchen, but they're also cooking food for themselves, and they sit down and eat the food, but they're talking to me, but they're not having me do anything, or they're not engaging me in their play. So that's independent play. You may also see aggressive play. Aggressive play doesn't mean that that child is aggressive. You may be like, well, April, what does that mean? So it can be the use of aggressive toys. So using Nerf guns or swords, we consider those aggressive toys. Or I've had kids handcuff me the entire session. That's an aggressive type thing that also could be protection and safety, which we'll talk about in just a second. It could be the use of a bop bag. So that's aggressive toys, but they're not being aggressive towards you. It also could be kids that play aggressively. So they give you a sword and they want you to sword fight. No one's being hurt, but that's an aggressive type of play. So those aggression, that may let you know that a child is struggling with some anger, that they may be internalizing some things, but also that they could do really well with some type of externalizing the activity. So like I do kickboxing. That's a great way for me to get aggression out. And we want kids to learn, and parents and adults, that anger isn't a bad emotion. It's what we do with it. Two more I want to talk about really quickly. One is grief. Grief is not only when someone dies. Grief could be, in this Podcourse, I don't talk about all of the contributing factors because we'd be here for 3 hours, but there are racial disparities in child welfare. There is racial disparities in school discipline. Black children account for 50% of the kids that are in alternative schools. That could be a grief event. And so grief can look like the child in their play having people dying a lot or burying people. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone has died, but they're communicating grief. So we know that we need to treat this child from a grief perspective. And then finally, that rescue and protection theme. So rescue theme can look like using superheroes to save people. It could be the use of what I call our community helpers, so police officers and doctors and firefighters and their vehicles. That can be used in the child's play as a way of rescue. It also can be used as a way of protection as well too. But protection also could be like the use of putting on helmets with costumes and shields, or that kid that put me in the handcuffs. They were communicating that I wasn't a safe person. And I stayed handcuffed the entire time, and I watched the duration of that decrease. What's really important to know is if we just continue to let kids play that out, that theme will eventually disappear because they have a safe place to work those things out. So as we then talk about specific activities, one activity I like to do is called code switching masks. So something that happens in our community, we all do it. I code switch within as a mental health professional, like who I am here talking on the Podcourse is not who I am. Dr. April and April are two completely different people, right? So within the Black community, though, we code switch. So there are spaces that we're not welcome into, that we may need to change our appearance. Maybe I straighten my hair. I think of my friend before natural hair really, and there's still states that are allowed to discriminate based off of hair. There's something called the Crown Act. I recommend everybody look up to see if the Crown Act has been passed in your state. If it has not, please sign a petition to do that. You may have remembered a few years ago, there was a Black teen wrestler that he didn't have to, but I think he felt like he needed to. The referee basically said that his dreadlocks was an unfair advantage. So he cut off his dreadlocks in order to continue the match. Like, that's demeaning. Our hair is an extension of ourselves. Our hair is our crown. Our hair is something we take a lot of pride in. The hair industry for Black people, Black women specifically, is $1 billion industry. Okay. So we are very connected to our hair. And so, but sometimes we're not welcomed into certain spaces. Like when my friend was just becoming an attorney, they literally taught her in law school that they needed to straighten their hair when they go before they go to court hearings. And so we do these different things. We change the way that we talk, we change the way that we dress, and that can be exhausting. So this activity is a way to help us provide a safe place for children to be able to process the feelings that they have around that. So you can take a craft mask, and on the front of it, this is kind of a little spin if you've ever done like the inside outside mask, like how I, the feelings that I show to other people and the feelings I keep inside, or how the world sees me and how I really am. Mm-hmm. We do this with a code switching twist. So what places on the outside of the mask, what places do you feel like you have to code switch? What people do you feel like you have to code switch? What type of feelings do you have around the fact that you have to code switch? And they may use words like, I feel fake, or I feel nervous, or I feel like I have to be different. And on the inside of the mask, they would decorate what places you can be yourself, people that you can be yourself around. How does it feel whenever you can be your authentic self? So this is a way to, I think it's just really important that we provide spaces to be able to help Black children process what they're going through. When I think about parenting, we are tough on Black children as parents and as, auntie and our village, because we know that the world's not going to be soft on you. So I know that you're going to go out in school and you're going to be treated differently. So I got to make sure that you're ready for that. But the problem is, Lisa, I always say, if schools are tough on Black children, if parents are tough on Black children, who lets Black children be children? Who's soft with Black children? We can have that talk with them so they are aware of their reality, because Black children are 6 times more likely to die in a police encounter. But we also aren't saying, how does that make you feel? What can I do to make you feel better? Because Black children are more likely to go in schools that have police officers. We're not giving them the coping skills. They're in their brainstem and then they're going into these environments. So we need to help them process that. So a lot of these activities we're going to talk about is to be able to provide that space to process those feelings. So another activity I like to do is called Color My Esteem. So there's 2 websites, danaclarkcolors.com and puzzlehuddle.com. And they have free downloads of worksheets, coloring sheets that have Black children on them. And I recommend that you have them printed just to have in your waiting room and just to have in your playroom for kids to color. But I like to use this as a way to help with addressing self-esteem. Again, if I'm constantly in environments where I'm told I have to change my hair because it's not good enough, when I'm told that the way that I talk isn't proper English, when the way that I act is not the correct way, it starts to affect my self-esteem. Mm-hmm. So this activity is a way to help us assess where a child's self-esteem is, and then to utilize positive affirmations to help increase that self-esteem. So with this handout, I like to have them identify something positive about themselves and pick a color for it. Some of y'all may have done something called Feelings Heart. Again, I like to take things, kind of put a little twist on it and make it what I call for the culture, Lisa. So a positive thing I can say is I'm really smart. So I pick yellow for that. And another positive thing is I'm a great helper, and I pick green for that. But let's say those are the only 2 positive things I can come up with myself. Those are the only 2 colors I can use to color this picture. So if I want more, I have to come up with more positive things, but I also have to take that and turn it into an affirmation as well too. So then they can use this as daily affirmations for them. So that's Color My Esteem. Another activity is coping skills playlist. I love music. I'm always having music playing and dancing, music in the shower, music while I'm cooking. I love music. And within our culture, music is also very dear to our heart. And we, again, go all the way back to enslaved times. We were singing while we were working, or church songs, and how that helps instill hope when we felt so helpless. So music, the Harlem Renaissance, all that, like music is embedded within the Black culture. And so I love the kickboxing. I love going for a walk, but sometimes we just need lazy coping skills. Or sometimes my depression is so high, I don't have the energy to go do those things that are more physical. So a coping skills playlist is playlists that we can have kids create that they can play and that are connected with maybe feelings. So like I have a playlist whenever I need to be reminded that I'm a boss. You know, maybe it's got a lot of Beyonce and Mary J. Blige on there.
Right.
I have some music whenever I'm feeling sad that like Missy Elliott, Lose Control is just a song, no matter what, if you play it, I'm going to start dancing. So that's something that can be an uplifting. So we would encourage kids to create these playlists of whenever you're feeling sad or, you know, maybe they're in foster care. What are some playlists of songs that remind you of your family or remind you of happy memories with your parents? So this then becomes something that they can play whenever they need to create that playlist, and all they got to do is push play.
Mm.
So another thing that I like to do is called Zentangle affirmation. So Zentangle, if you've never heard of it, is an art technique. I like to call it doodling with a purpose.
Mm.
So it's essentially taking like a piece of paper, putting it into different sections. And I can send a link for a video if that's more helpful. But let's say I take a piece of paper and I create 4 different sections on there. In one section, I may draw hearts. And what I want that client to do then is to come up with an affirmation that is connected with that symbol. So it may say something like, you know, I love Black people. I don't know, just making up stuff off the dome here. And then maybe I have stars in another one, and I may put Black girl magic. And then another one, I may have just some squiggly lines or something. And either way, you create a pattern in each section, and you just continue with that pattern. And so this is kind of my spin of how can we take that activity and this, again, affirmations, empowerment is really important to me. It's really important that we help Black children learn how to use their voice in effective ways and in safe ways. Again, when we think about Trayvon Martin, Trayvon was just a kid going to the store.
Mm-hmm.
And George Zimmerman was not a police officer. And this child was being stalked, and he turned around to defend himself, and he died because of that. So it's easy for us to say, you know, champion for this and this and that, but we have to be really careful that there are, you know, consequences for that as well too. So going into another activity is social justice posters in that same breath. So how can we empower Black children to advocate and get involved now? My 10-year-old nephew that can't play with Nerf guns, he has this nonprofit agency that he wants to create for Black people. And he, no matter what I tell him, Lisa, I keep trying to tell him, we can do this now.
Yeah.
Auntie April can get an LLC. We can do what we need to. He thinks he needs to be older to do it. So I'm still working on him to understand that like kids can do great things. And so this social justice poster is just really encouraging kids. You know how you see like maybe Black Lives Matter signs that are in people's front yards or in their windows. You're basically creating a sign for whatever thing that they are empowered to use their voice for. I use this oftentimes with schools too, because then they can have these posters in their hallway. A poster that I created was more on why I do what I do, like kind of the question you asked at the very beginning of the Podcourse is, I researched and just found pictures of any child that died under the age of 21 due to some negative race-based experience. And I have Emmett Till on there. And I also have Khalif Browder, he basically was wrongfully accused of stealing something. He didn't do it, but because he couldn't make bail, he was in Rikers for years and subjected to just harsh treatment, solitary confinement. He wound up getting released because his name and story got out there, and like big celebrities like Jay-Z did a lot to advocate for his release. But when he was released, he committed suicide. He died by suicide because everything that he went through was just too much. And so that's a really sad one, but again, it empowers me to do what I do. And so we can also have them doing those art activities. Our final one is, I like to call it, there's a website called sounditouttogether.org that you can utilize this. But I also like to call it going with the flow. And you can give the child a list of coping skills and a list of feelings. and we encourage them to create a song or hip hop rhyme that integrates these feelings and these coping skills. So it's a way to utilize music therapy. It's a way to be able to help increase emotional expression and their vocabulary, and to also encouraging the use of coping skills. So the Sound It Out Together website, they actually have some instrumental beats that you can utilize as well too. They originally created the game to be able to help increase communication between adults and children, but you can also still utilize it in your practice.
Cool. That's a lot. Oh my gosh,
That is a lot.
so many amazing tools that you can use. So the child-centered play therapy with Black youth, is that like a group play therapy type of
Yeah,
model?
it's
Okay.
more of how you can utilize it in a group setting. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. So, there's not a lot of research out there specifically on play therapy with Black children. That's a multitude of reasons. On one end, research has shown that Black researchers are less likely to get their topics funded. But then also, there is a level of, difficulty oftentimes finding participants for these studies because of the level of medical mistrust that has happened, developed because of what's happened in our community, Tuskegee experiments, forced sterilization, things of that sort. So it's twofold as to why that research is limited. So the research that is out there, it is more using child-centered, and the population sizes are a little bit smaller. So I think that's important to know as we talk about what's out there. So child-centered group play therapy, though, has been utilized a lot in research with Black children to see about the effectiveness. So that is essentially having like 2 to 3, I wouldn't do more than 4 kiddos in your playroom or in a group setting. This is going to be really good for those that are in schools. I know y'all school counselors, you guys have a lot of schools, a lot of students on your caseload, and oftentimes you're trying to fit them all in. That's why I think, again, clinical assessments are really good because it'll help you figure out, who's screening for this, who can I pair together that would be a really good fit. So if you are in settings where it would be beneficial, not just for you, but also for the kids to get them in a group, I would recommend, if you're working with Black children, doing child-centered group play therapy with them. So it's essentially child-centered in a group. You would allow the kids to pick whatever toys and activities that they want to. There's a nice balance that you have to have of making sure that you are attuned to each child individually, that you aren't just saying, all right, guys, great job playing. You're saying, hey, Lisa, I love the way that you're helping out Michelle and getting their costume on. And Jessica, I see how hard you're working to get those Legos put together so you guys can play that game. So you still want to make sure that you're having an independent relationship with each child within the group. But it can be really beneficial because children may feel more comfortable playing with certain toys, and it gives a level of permissiveness that they maybe would not have done in your individual setting. So again, going back to the dollhouse, they may not touch that because they're worried about, like, am I allowed to play it? But if they see another child playing with it, they may feel, hey, that's okay to play with. Mm-hmm. They may then feel more likely to participate more freely. Remember, we talked about that independent play within the play themes. Having other kids may allow for them to feel more comfortable to engage in a more connected play that we wouldn't have been able to see in an individual session. They also may be emotionally stimulated by another kid's play. Maybe they did come in super sad because they just got yelled at by a teacher. And if we were in an individual setting, they still would be super quiet and, maybe a little sad, but seeing other kids playing and running around and being happy could help shift their feelings and their emotions as well too. And then ultimately, kids learn from one another through play. So when we think about maybe some of the socialization that's been disrupted because of the racial trauma, yeah, we can do social skills and do role play in the individual session, but man, you can really see that happen, and it can happen naturally between kids if we do it within a group setting. So it allows the opportunity for us as clinicians to also observe the child's interpersonal skills and their interactions with others. So not all of us get the opportunity to go observe our children real time in their environment. I've had the pleasure of doing that sometimes with kids, and it's interesting because, we all develop bias. We all do. It is what it is. But it's interesting. I observed a kid in their school setting one time, And this is a kid that he's always getting in trouble for not being in his seat and being disruptive. And as I observed him, I watched other kids doing the exact same thing and the teacher not saying anything. And then as soon as my client did it, then they
Mm.
got called out. So if I only went off of that teacher's report, I could look at this kid and say, oh, this kid has difficulty staying still. They don't follow directions. And I may give an ADHD diagnosis or an oppositional defiant. But then observing it, I can see that no, this kid is doing what everyone else is doing. What I have to work with that child is what is the right thing to do, even though other kids may be doing it, because you are getting singled out. Like I talk to my kids, I keep it real. Yeah. How does it feel that, everyone else was doing it and you were the only one that got in trouble for it? But at the same time, what were you supposed to be doing?
Right.
But still have some personal responsibility. So within a child group setting, if I've been told that Lisa, the child, hits people, but then I see in a group setting that actually it takes about 10 times of them getting picked on, then they punch someone, then I know that it's not really the aggression that we have to work on. It's the emotional regulation. It's the helping them recognize that volcano before it explodes, opposed to labeling them aggressive. So it gives you a better view of what that child's needs are, so we can diagnose more effectively.
Okay, that's great. I think that's really a wonderful technique and, tool to have. And I love how you were able to explain, like, it's easy for us to kind of go to the automatic, oh, it's ADHD or it's aggression or it's OCD, but to get into their environment and to observe what's really going on is always, to me, like, maybe that's because I'm a family systems background and I want to see how the person interacts in the system. But I think that sounds really interesting to me. Okay, so we've covered so much and this has been fabulous. Is there anything else that you want to share about, the actual interventions or techniques that we haven't covered yet?
I would just say, if you're trained or aware of the cognitive behavioral play therapy approach or TFCBT, that's a really good approach from a play-based standpoint to be able to support Black youth. Again, because the negative rumination, there's something called perceived burdensome that Black children experience, which is exactly what the name sounds like. Like they think that they're being a burden because of, again, all these spaces that are being told that you're not good enough here or you're not welcome here, and then your parents start to say, what's wrong with you, why aren't you acting right? And that again is a sign or a risk factor for suicidality. So I think cognitive work is really important, trauma-based work is really important. And if you are trained in Sandtray is going to be really helpful, especially because you get the kids that are too cool to play. You get the tweens and teens, and Sandtray has been really helpful. I do Sandtray first session with all of my clients that are teens and tweens, because it's a good way to introduce what play can be that isn't, only toys. And I've had some kids open up so well, especially Black children, about what's been going on with them. But then the same way, and that's why you need to be trained in Sandtray, because their Sandtray can communicate what's going on, the type of miniatures they're selecting, where they're putting it in Sandtray, the types of scenes that they're creating can let us know what's going on, because it brings out the unconscious. Another thing I would recommend is games, y'all. Games go a long way, especially with those older kids. You need to have just a set of playing cards, Uno, Connect Four, and Sorry. I have had kids where we play games the entire time and we have not talked. And again, you have to be comfortable with silence. And then that same kid has come in and we play a game, and then out of nowhere, they start talking to me about all kinds of things. And so games have been really effective. And we oftentimes want to take games and ask questions with it, and you can put a therapeutic spin on it. I've played Uno with emotions, and every time you put down a red card and, name something that makes you angry. But I've seen a lot of value. We have to lean into the therapeutic value of what play can be, that we don't always have to come in with questions and intention, that it's a way to build relationships that kids, I promise, they're going to open up without you even having to ask a question.
Yeah. I think that's really important. And I think that's as, especially for new clinicians who are getting into this work, we want to, or they, or we, I mean, I feel like well, being that I'm new to play therapy, my intention would be, I got to get it out of them. I got to get them to
Mhm.
talk, and it's such a different environment. It's such a different relationship. You have to give the space. You have to let them have permission
Mhm.
to just be and show up as they need to be, and when they're ready, if you've built that relationship and you've built that safe space for them, they will meet you there. So I think that's great. Do you
Yeah.
and I ask about this because I interviewed Dr. Altvader on virtual play therapy. Is that something that you recommend? Virtual play or video games? Yeah. Okay, you're nodding your head, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Once COVID happened, we all went telehealth. The kid that I'm thinking about, there is a website called coolmathgames.com, and they
Mhm.
have free games on there. And he taught me, I'm horrible at it, but he taught me how to play chess.
Oh, cool.
And on there, we can create our own personal game and play each other. And that's what we would do in telehealth sessions, but
Mhm.
also Roblox. Roblox was like my saving grace. You could still use play themes in there because it was interesting when I first started doing Roblox. I kind of had this rule of no violent games. There's this game called Piggy that just like freaks me out. I don't like scary things, Lisa. So it was my stuff. He like chases you with red eyes and he
Ooh.
tries to kill you. Yeah, it's pretty intense. But then I had to sit back. And this is what we have to do a lot of times as clinicians, and especially with play. I had to realize, April, in the playroom, you would have aggressive toys because you want to see that theme being played out. It's the same thing within our games that they're selecting. They're communicating aggression through the games that they're selecting. But I got to learn a lot about my kids. There's one called Bloxburg, and it's basically like a kid's version of Sims. And they could invite me to their house. And one kid, she'd pick me up in her car and drive me to her house. And she would cook while I sat down and watched TV. But I was able to learn more about my kids that I didn't realize. Like one kid, I'd learned that she wants to be an interior designer because she loved designing houses. Another kid, we were able to realize there was some cyberbullying, and that was a topic that we were able to address. But I also got to see in real time because, like, her mom told her, if you're in a game and that person comes in, you have to leave. And there were several times we were playing and we had to leave the game because that person came in, and it became like a real life, real time, like, hey, how does that make you feel that you were playing in this game and now you had to move over? So yes, it is very effective, and I recommend people get more comfortable. I know we feel like it already is hard sometimes to gain buy-in that I'm
Mhm.
playing with your kid and I'm helping your kid. So then on top of that, I'm playing Roblox with them. So I'm a communicator. You can probably tell from the way that I talked in this Podcourse. I let all my parents know what's going on. Hey, I'm playing Roblox with them, and the reason that I'm doing this and what it's helpful for. So then parents weren't like, I'm making them get off Roblox to then get on a session with you to go play Roblox. What are you doing? So I think making sure you communicate with parents kind of the rhyme for your reason is a really good way to make sure that they feel comfortable with what you're doing with them too.
Gotcha. Okay, that's really helpful. I know that's something that she mentioned too, and I think we're gonna cover that in the next objective is well, the next objective is explore 7 ways to support Black caregivers, and I know one of the things that I learned in my interview with her was always be communicating with the parents. Let them know what play therapy is, how this works, kinda like the I don't know, expectations, things like that. So, I'll let you, dive into this objective and let you kind of share where you wanna go with it.
Yeah. So, I think it's really important that you develop relationships with caregivers no matter what. I say the relationship or the effort that I put in developing the rapport with the child is just as important as with the parent, but especially when we're dealing with Black parents, because again, they're already dealing with their own racial and trauma histories, maybe their own levels of racial mistrust. And so when we're talking about undoing historical things that are done within our culture and parenting, it's going to be really hard to do if you don't have that relationship with their caregiver. So for example, spanking, right? Spanking is Again, rooted in slavery and, mama taking over, the whipping, because I'm not going to hurt you as bad as the slave owner. But even the words we use to this day of like, I'll beat the black off of you or go get a switch, it's very rooted in slavery. And so within the Black community, you have parents that either they themselves or members within their village are telling you, you need to just beat them, girl. Or if you try to do unorthodox ways like timeout, girl, we don't do that. That's white people stuff. So if we're trying to teach Black caregivers a different way, we have to understand that there's going to be more hurdles to that. So our relationship with them is going to be even more key, because to have that conversation would be a little uncomfortable, because we're coming in and we're letting you know what you're doing is harming your child. If you're hitting your child, they're learning that that's how you respond. Aggression is learned. So they're going to also then do that at school or do that whenever they're angry. So I have to work with the parent of, how do you model appropriate coping skills? I'm angry right now. I need to go to my room and I'll come out when I'm ready and I'm able to talk to you. That's how we model. But it's going to be hard if you don't have that relationship with the caregiver, because they're going to say that you don't understand. I can have this conversation with my caregivers, even though my practice is closed. I think of those conversations I've had with Black caregivers, and they're more receptive to hearing that because I have a relationship with them. They know that I'm coming from a place that I think is best. I'm still human, right? They know that I really care about their kid. And so if I am talking to them, that it is coming from a good place. So then I can be more laid back and have that relationship where I say, all right, Lisa, girl, we're going to have a talk, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, you may not like me after this, but just know it's because I want to help you. And then as they're talking and they say those things like, Miss April, in my mind, as you're telling me this, I just think I shouldn't have to do that. I shouldn't have to explain this to my kid. I shouldn't have to do what we call now like gentle parenting. And you're right, you shouldn't have to, but does your child respond to it? And does that resolve the issue? So not just only involving them in the treatment, but having a relationship with them is going to be key. Mm-hmm. Knowing what they got going on in their lives. I worked with a parent that was an activist when everything was going on with Ferguson. And so anytime things came up in the news about Ferguson, there's been several activists that have been found dead since Ferguson. So anytime that came up in the news and I would see this mother, I would just say, hey, are you okay? Do you need to talk? And that just went a long way because I was attuned to her emotionally about what was going on. Mm-hmm. And she would always just say, thank you for asking. So knowing the parents, knowing what's going on, then allows for them to feel more comfortable when you have to have those conversations that are a little bit more unorthodox, and to help them feel comfortable in standing in that. Because again, you're going to have family members that say, what are you doing? You need to just beat them. You need to just whoop them. So when they're trying to do new things, they have to have the wherewithal, I guess, to advocate that they're doing what's best for their kid. So it is really important that we do involve them also in their educational and their mental health process. When I work with schools, I tell them that it's really important that you are not only just calling a parent whenever their kid's in trouble, because then that's going to ruin the relationship. They're going to say, they only call me when it's a problem. And it really bothers me when I work with these families and they say, I guess he's doing okay because I haven't heard from the school. That's heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. If we can pick up the phone, and I get it, I ran a therapeutic preschool, but I had a rule that if I call your mama because you're acting up, I'm gonna call your mama when you're doing great. Mm-hmm. Because I don't want to only call whenever there's negative things. You deserve to know the positive things as well too. And then you're not avoiding my phone call because you actually don't know what I'm calling for. Right. Or if you're in schools, I've worked with a lot of school counselors, or what are just events that you can have that are just for parents, self-care, mm-hmm. art activities. And it doesn't always have to be, I had someone, when I did a training in California, she was like, I had African drummers come and nobody came. And I was like, you're doing too much. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to play Black Panther. It doesn't have to be during Black History Month. You want to actually move away from those things, because again, that shows that you have well intentions and it's not just because you're checking the box off. So developing that relationship, helping caregivers set limits and guidelines for appropriate behaviors while also encouraging emotional expression. So what does that mean? So we still want kids to be able to express their feelings. And a lot of kids, not just Black kids, but Black kids too, aren't allowed to express emotions. They're not allowed to be bored. They're not allowed to be tired. They're not allowed to be sad. Like, what do you have to be sad about? We need to be able to allow them to express those feelings, but then still set limits. Like at that preschool, I'm telling you, I got beat up so many times by 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. But I would tell them, they would come over after it was done. Let's say they even tore up the room. Mm-hmm. I would sit with them and then I would tell them, whenever you're ready, I will help you clean the room. Even though I didn't do it, I'll help you. And let's talk about it. And they would apologize. And I would say, I accept your apology. And I know there's a lot going on in your little head. I know you really want to see your mom, and that's frustrating. Mm-hmm. But we still don't get to throw chairs because we didn't get an extra cookie. Well, let's go ahead and go outside. We talked about the limit, we cleaned up, and we let it go. Mm-hmm. We sometimes hold on to things with kids as well, too. It's a new day. Mm-hmm. So helping parents understand that as well, too, is setting those limits, not letting kids just run amok, still providing personal responsibility. You know, you still threw a chair, so we have to have a consequence. But like Gary Landry says, we give small consequences to small kids and big consequences to big kids. So making sure it's appropriate for their age. And then once it's done, it's done. Mm-hmm. And that communicates to kids that even though I had this rough moment, my parent does still love me. We don't realize how much that love and affection is missing, especially within the relationships with Black children, especially with Black boys, because we feel this need for them to be tough. Again, that toxic masculinity. And I worked with a Black boy, he was a teen, and he was saying that, you know, there was some contention between the relationship with his mom. And he kept saying, she doesn't love me. And I said, what do you need to see for your mom for you to know that she loves you? It's a 13-year-old Black boy. And he said, I just need her to say, I love you and give me more hugs. That goes so long. It goes so far, right? And of course, mom was like devastated when I told her that, because she felt bad, because we think, you know, kids get a certain age and they don't need that. It's also helping parents understand, especially Black parents, that kids are not too old for us to love on them. Right. And what me and that mom, I kind of get the smile about is we kind of came up with this saying that the small things go a long way. You don't always have to plan a trip. You don't always have to go buy something for them. Saying I love you, saying, hey, bud, I see how hard you're working. I know math's still a struggle, but I see that you're trying really hard, can really go a long way. We also want to, as much as possible, encourage them to participate in family clinical services. There's something called filial play therapy. So I'm very much a filial play therapist. I believe that anyone that is like interacting with Black children, which is why we have the Heritage Youth Connection program set up the way that we do, I want everyone to have the knowledge and the skills that I have to work with kids, especially Black kids. So filial play therapy is essentially teaching our caregivers how to have playtime with their kids. Unrestricted, uninhibited, no questions asked. The kid gets to pick whatever they want to play. And it's a way to enhance their parent-child relationship. They use this a lot. They call it special playtime within parent-child interaction therapy, where they encourage parents to have 5 minutes of special time with their kids every day, regardless of their behavior. If we had a bad day at school, we still have special time. If you were suspended that day, we still have special time, because it communicates to that child, I'm here regardless of what way that you show up, regardless of your behavior, I love you. And again, because play is needed. Oftentimes play is seen as a reward, and it really needs to be a way of life. Play needs to be embedded within a kid's day, because it's a way for them to release. It's a way for them to get everything out. It helps them concentrate better. It helps regulate them. And if we can teach parents how to be able to play with them, then my theory is it can help address the accessibility issues. In my research, I found that Black parents are 5 times more likely to have difficulty finding clinical services for their children. So there used to be this adage in the Black community that Black folks don't get therapy. And now it's shifted. I think it's shifted because of social media and more of an emphasis on mental health, because of directors like Issa Rae and Tyler Perry that implement and embed mental health in their media. Black people are wanting therapy, but they don't have access to it, or they don't know where to get it, or they don't know what therapy looks like. So we can teach parents how to do play with their kids and help with their lifelong bond as well too. Some other ways that we want to support Black caregivers, understanding that there may need to be some case management. Again, we didn't talk about disparities and how they go across systems. Even in talking about mental health services, working class Black men are less likely to get a call back from mental health services than middle class white women. So you might be giving a referral for the Black father of the child that you're working with, for them to get their own therapy. And they're saying, I'm calling people and they're not calling back, they're not calling back. You may have to actually step in a little bit more, maybe reach out to your network of people. There's websites like Therapy for Black Men and Therapy for Black Girls. Mm-hmm. You may have to do a little bit more legwork, knowing that there's these disparities. Or I was working with she's not a parent, but I was working with a young Black woman that had endometriosis. And she was really struggling because she was in so much pain. And me understanding that Black women are less likely to be prescribed medicine for pain because we're often seen as drug seeking. We had to work a lot more. Our work was more focused on relieving her pain because the pain was over clouding the mental health or contributing to the mental health. So understanding that you may have to go an extra level with case management is really important, but also an extra level with the relationship. I'll tell one more story, Lisa. Sorry, I like stories. That helps.
Okay. They're great. They bring it all to life. I love it.
Yeah. I was doing this training earlier this year, and a white clinician, a white male clinician, I love that he was transparent enough to share this. He basically was saying that he received a case from another therapist. It was a white female therapist working with a Black child. The Black child in those sessions with this white female therapist was jumping out of the window. They were on the first floor, but the child was jumping out of the window in these sessions. And the white male, when he got this case, he admitted that he already started with a level of anger and annoyance with this family because of what the colleague had told him. And then he said, I felt like the grandmother was making me work for the relationship. And I said, well, first of all, we have to look at this situation from a trauma standpoint. If a child is fleeing, that's letting me know that they're in their brainstem. So something within that session, within the room, within the environment, something with that therapist, that child was feeling that they were unsafe and their brain said, you got to get out of here. So that child leaving out of the room wasn't a defiance, it was a trauma response. Number two, if then the grandmother is coming here to a second clinician that is white, she now has her own beliefs or experience that she probably is coming in with a chip on her shoulder or worried and looking to protect her grandson. Mm-hmm. So yeah, she wants to make sure that you're a safe person. She wants to make sure that you are a competent person and that you're not going to, who knows what that child shared with the grandma. And she may have her own stuff. So yeah, you're going to have to work for that relationship a little bit more, but also identify, why are you so angry? Why does that bother you so much that you have to develop a relationship a little bit more? You may have to talk about things that aren't even mental health related. Why does that bother you so much? And so understanding that we have to be patient with our caregivers as well too, because they have their own stuff that we may have to help them unravel. Now, it's a very thin line. I work with parents on their parenting skills, but if I'm working with their kid, I don't become the parent's therapist. Understanding when you need to step in and give them a separate therapist. And then if you're doing family therapy, that's different, but make sure you're not doing trauma work with the parent while you're also, that's dual relationships. And so, yeah, that was the last point, is being mindful of racial mistrust. And I already kind of mentioned that earlier in the Podcourse. Mm-hmm. Have a level of humility, depersonalize it. It's not Lisa, the human being. It may be Lisa that represents a white therapist that I've already dealt with other environments or other systems that have devalued me, that have minimized the things that I've shared. And so I'm not quite sure about you. So just have patience, I think would be my final way to wrap that up. And just spend that time developing the relationship. And I guarantee as you continue working with that family, they're going to be more receptive to those skills that you're bringing in, or the ideas that you're bringing in of what they can do to parent more effectively.
Okay. Wow. This has been incredible and I've learned so much and I'm so grateful that I was able to interview you and have you speak on this topic. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners today that maybe, kind of last minute things or anything that kind of popped
Yeah, I
in?
think the main thing is, I think it's really important. I kind of barely mentioned it on implicit bias. I really encourage you to do the soul searching. It's not going to be comfortable. It's not going to be, pleasing, but we all have bias. And, as a Black clinician, I have exhibited bias towards my kids that I didn't even realize. When I was I've worked with Black boys before, but in my playroom where I have all these other things to kind of rely on. And when I was working with a school that I didn't have as many, tools in my toolkit to use actually there. I love sand trade, and I've said that before. And I didn't do sand trade with these older Black boys because I was like, they're gonna think it's whack. They're gonna think I'm whack. There was a school counselor that went to my sand trade training. This is the school year COVID happened. So I went back to go get my stuff. And when I went there, the counselor pulled me to the side. She was so excited. She said, April, I've been doing sand trade with the boys and they love it. And I was like, oh.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I use that example to be vulnerable and honest that we all do it, and it's because of media, it's because of the all the different things that are out there in the world that we put people into little boxes and we develop these unconscious bias. And so I really encourage you to do some soul searching, to think about how your bias might be showing up in all of the work that you do, but especially with Black children and families. Do you notice that you have a little bit more of annoyance because of this or whatever? Where is that coming from? It's important that you check it at the door, because our job is to make sure that we provide non-judgmental space, a safe space, and also make sure you're not bringing in your own stuff, especially if you are a Black clinician, right? You might have some counter transference because their story sounds so similar. So boundaries is also going to be really important. But basically, if you're trying, then you're doing a great job. The end.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you said what you said at the end. And I you brought it up in the beginning, but it's definitely a great reminder. And I think, it's funny because we need to hear that at all levels of clinician developmental stages. It's not just the new clinician or the one that's, kind of shifting and pivoting into a new clinical specialty. It's, man, I've been doing this work for a long time and it's such a great reminder. And so thank you for bringing that back up.
You're
And
welcome.
okay, so one more thing. So where can folks find you if they want to learn more about you or consult with you or all the good stuff about Dr. April? Where should they go?
You can find me on LinkedIn, just April Duncan. I am on Instagram, finally getting my professional Instagram life together. So it's Dr.April_D, because Dr. April D already exists somewhere in the world. But also our website, bmhconnect.com. That's where you can find more things about training. We come to agencies and do trainings. That's where you can find out about the Heritage Ambassadors training. And also we do have a resource center as well too, for adults and kids. So videos, articles, books. If this topic is something that really resonated with you, or you're working with this population, that is a place that you can get additional psychoeducation that you can have for yourself or also to share with your clients.
Okay, great. I also want to plug Hopscotch because I've seen you on their Instagram, what do you call it, page, doing some, examples. And I just learned so much. So I think you did the goldfish, the different colored goldfish. And I
Yes,
thought that
yes.
was
I
so
hate
wonderful.
recording myself. That's why I'm looking like that, Lisa.
No, I know.
Nobody likes to look at themselves.
No, I totally get it. Reels are just not my thing.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I totally hear you. But I know that you can definitely get some great information over on the Hopscotch Instagram page and Facebook page because they do share your techniques and stuff, which I think is really great. Well, thank you again, Dr. April. I've just so enjoyed this. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it as well too. And thank you all for listening as well too.
Yeah, I know. Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine.
Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover more fantastic content.
And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.